אני הולך לפגוש אותה בגן העדן. תתארו לכם קצת אושר, כי הוא כל כך נדיר כאן, עיר מגניבה בתוך החושך, ושנינו בשמיכה, והיא מלטפת אותי ואומרת לי מחר יקרה מה שרצית, ואם לאט השתקפויות של עצם ושמחה. תתארו לכם בעת היום יפה, שמיים עליכם, אהבה איתכם, כן ככה זה קרה. היא אמרה, אני עוד זוכר אותה, כמו בסערה. תתארו לכם אותי נופל לתוך זאת ערה. תתארו לכם עולם פשוט, חדר ללילה, בית בגשם, ריחות עצים מלאים בדוק, ושנינו שיכורים. אם ניפרד אני אמות, היא לוחשת וגורשת. תתארו לכם עוד הזדמנות לחזור פתאום לנעורים. תתארו לכם את החיים זזים אחורה וקדימה, מה שחסר שהוא מתמלא, מה שהיה פתאום ישנו, ואני מביט לתוך עיניה ונגנב בכוח פנימה. תתארו לכם אותנו מגשימים את כל החלומות. תתארו לכם באמצע יום יפה, שמיים עליכם, אהבה איתכם, כן ככה זה קרה. לפתע היא אמרה, אני עוד זוכר אותה, כמו בסערה. תתארו לכם אותי נופל לתוך זאת ערה. תתארו לכם עולם יפה, פחות עצוב ממשהו ככה, ואנחנו שם הולכים עם שמש בכיסים. תתארו לכם עולם יפה, יהיו בתוך החושך, עולם פשוט. תתארו לכם קצת אושר. שאריות של החיים, ולחיות את הרגע, להתחיל לאסוף את השברים. אולי יצא יותר, להתחיל קצת למהר, להתחיל להסתדר ולעשות קצת רעש. אולי מקום אחר, מקום יותר בוער, להתחיל קצת לקלקל ולתקן עוד פעם. מה הזמן מסמן לי? זה הכל שאריות של החיים, ולחיות את הרגע, להתחיל לאסוף את השברים.
Well, good evening, everyone. Wonderful to have you with us. This is Valley Beth Shalom, College of Jewish Studies. I'm Rabbi Ed Feinstein, and it's delightful to have all of you here. We endeavor at College of Jewish Studies to offer university level learning without the football games, without the term papers, without the quizzes and sororities, but to maintain a wonderful level of learning. And it's delightful to have all of you here. This year, as you well know, we're learning about Israeli culture. Those of us who consider ourselves advocates for Israel, supporters of Israel, I think it's very important that we have a sense of the inner life of Israel and how that inner life of Israel reflects upon the character of its society and the culture that people share. And it's a wonderful opportunity for us to bridge across this ocean and to come close. So thank you for being with us tonight. A very, very special welcome and thank you to Lil and Jess Beim, our dear friends who have endowed this program and continue to support it with such love and such care. And we're wonderful to have them with us tonight and to welcome them and to wish them a wonderful, wonderful time enjoying this College of Jewish Studies. You should, as they say in Hebrew, shepa little nachas, right? To enjoy some pride in what we have created together over these many, many, many years. So tonight we're going to be continuing our conversation with Mr. Sagi Raphael, our art curator and our guide through Israeli art. And as a preview of coming attractions, please know that next week we will welcome a dear friend, Donny Massing, who is a scholar and performer of Jewish music, of Hebrew music, and Israeli music, and is going to be taking us through the history of Israeli music as a reflection of Israeli character. And that's going to be our conversation for next week. So please join us for that and the week after. And there'll be a playlist, which means a list of music that you can access online and enjoy together as you take up all this wonderful exploration of Israeli life. So welcome. It's really good to have you here. Let me remind you once again that if you have a question for our presenter, the way we're doing this is, I know, a little bit stiff, but if you'll please forgive me for this, just put it in the chat box. Just you can put it to everyone or put it just to me, and I'd be really happy to rephrase it or present it as you presented it to our speaker if we have the time to do that this evening. Okay, so really wonderful to have everybody here. I'm looking for my friend Yona Goldberg. She was here just a moment ago. Yona, are you still here? I think for some reason she dropped off for a moment because Yona was going to introduce our speaker, but let me see if I can find her. Ah, here she is. Yona, you here? If you can unmute and we welcome you. Yona? Yona, can you unmute so we can hear you? Yona, please. Well, for some reason, she's, I guess, stuck on mute for some reason. If we get Yona back during the course of the talk, we will once again ask her to introduce the speaker again. But until we can get her back, Yona, are you here? I'm so very sorry. Well, then let me take the prerogative of welcoming Mr. Sagi Raphael, who is a scholar of Israeli art, curator of Israeli art, and an advocate, I think, as well for Israeli art, and has done such a wonderful job last week in helping us understand how Israeli art reflects a society that is made up of people who were left out, and how the left out find their place in the world of Israeli art. So, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our dear friend, Mr. Sagi Raphael.
Hey, good evening, everybody. I'm going to share my screen, please. Thank you so much, Rabbi Feinstein, and thank you to Yona that actually introduced me to Rabbi Feinstein and to Valley Beth Shalom. I'm happy to be with you today, and thank you for joining us. So this is the second part of this kind of exploration of the rise of the overlooked Israeli art now. And to those of you that were with us last week, we talked about the Israeli society and Zionism and the idea of the new Jewish state as a melting pot for Jews that come from all sorts of different cultures with different histories and are trying to kind of forget what happened where they came from, and create a new identity, right? The new Jew that is going to be completely different from the old Jew. So I was just chatting with Rabbi Feinstein a few minutes ago when I said that I'm going to, if last week I talked about the Mizrahi and the Sephardic, today I'm going to try and squeeze in all of the others, which, you know, brings to mind the question, who isn't an other, right? We're all others in Israel and everywhere else. So if, you know, you think Israel, you think the Israeli state, they did try to kind of create a very cohesive and a very monolithic identity in a way. That was the idea. Also, you know, everybody was supposed to kind of start equally. You know, there's this idea, this utopian idea on one hand, and there is the reality on the other hand, and there is a gap between them. And after the lecture last week, I actually thought that I should have compared it to a baby, to a newborn, right? Parents, they have a baby, and they have all sorts of expectations and ideas what he or she are going to be when they grow up. And, you know, they're trying to kind of mold them in a certain shape or with some certain ideas, but you can never really know what's going to happen. And I think that this is actually what is happening with the state of Israel, and why there is kind of maybe sometimes a misunderstanding, or there is kind of a confusion. What happened to what we thought it's going to be and what it actually is. So this is the rise of the overlooked. I am hoping to cover everything, but I'm not sure, I'll try. So the Zionist, the new Jew, or the Zionist idea, I would say in general that it was an idea led by men, and the Zionist is a kind of a muscular concept, right? If we talked about Max Nordau and muscular Judaism, you know, trying to leave the old, weak victim of a Jew, a victim of the pogroms and of anti-Semitism, to live in the diaspora, to leave all the past behind, and to create a new Jew, a muscular Jew, a strong Jew, very much inspired, we saw, by maybe Soviet propaganda, by all sorts of things. So here are some examples by Yochanan Simon. Yochanan Simon was a leading artist, painter, and we can see, I'm sure that you're familiar with the name and his work about the life in the kibbutz, and we can also see his kind of a work, kind of a, I don't want to call it propaganda, just, you know, the more commercial work maybe. Let me work, by Totzeret Haaretz, by Israeli produce or whatever is manufactured in Israel. Actually, there's also maybe less known aspect of his work. For example, this painting that won the Dizengoff Prize in 1952, I think. And it's in the collection of the Tel Aviv Museum, showing in a way how the members of the kibbutz, again, are forming a united, kind of almost like a united body. Even their facial features, they very much look alike, because in the kibbutz, you know, the individual identity or the individuality, in a way, the individual desires, the individual characteristics are not so important, right? You're supposed to erase this singular identity in order to form a larger body, which is the kibbutz, and the, you know, the kind of the body of the kibbutz, like a general body of members. And so there is something very intimate in the bodily closeness between these men, which is supposed to be completely non-erotic, right? It's just about the camaraderie. It's just about kind of like the secular chavruta in the kibbutz, and just to show kind of how much it is actually inspired by Paul Cézanne, right? The post-impressionist. with this series, for example, The Bathers. I want to focus on masculinity for the first few minutes because for me, it has a direct line from Zionism to the others and to the change in Zionism and to the change in Israeli society, because it was very much led, maybe it's still today, but more even in the past, was led by men, by politicians, by generals, by wars, by machoistic society, soldiers. So it was very masculine. So the transition that happened the transitions that happened in Israeli society actually emerged all in this masculine society. We can see it by the others, by the outsiders, or by those that were inside and outside at the same time, that were experiencing things simultaneously. And some of them were artists, because many of the artists actually served in the army, right? So they can see it from inside me as well. I served in the army, so I saw the system from within, and I could have compared it to the image that it had from the outside. Maybe it is not what people think. We hear of wars, we hear of generals that become politicians. We know that it's a kind of a tool also to raise funds outside of Israel to show a very specific image of the IDF. But from the inside, it's very, very different, right? And artists, are kind of censors of society. They sometimes dare to say or paint or create artworks that don't speak in words, and they are open to interpretations. For example, Yoram Rozov can paint a pilot, like a pilot who is a hero, but that is also bound by these shackles, almost as if he's going to be sacrificed. So there is this duality, the duality that is open to interpretations. This is from 1975, only kind of 2 years after the Yom Kippur War. The transition in masculinity and representations of masculinity actually was, even within the art world back then in the late 1970s and early 1980s, it wasn't as much of a theme. Gender fluidity or kind of a talk about masculinity, it was too direct, and also it's not like now, right? Back then, in the early 80s, not many people thought about gender fluidity or kind of different masculinity. But artists were kind of in the forefront of that. Of course, they were also inspired by other artists, international artists as Andy Warhol and others that I'm going to show. And as part of the desire to embrace an international style or an international language, as we talked about last week, be less Cairo and more New York, right? Be more Western and less Eastern. The influences are also Western. So for example, Yaakov Mishori was one of the most important artists back then in late 70s and early 80s that dealt with kind of questioning masculinity and questioning what is the role of a man in the Israeli society. Is kind of reflecting inner emotions that he had, dealing with kind of a crisis in his life, but also with kind of questioning these commercial images, American images of the Marlboro man, right? If you want to be a man, you need to smoke, and you need to look like John Wayne in a way. And this is a very solid and very stereotypical way to be a man, to look like a man, and to behave like a man, right? So this is actually from a body of work of self-portraits photograph that he actually installed in a barbershop, because the barbershop was a space in his eyes where people were men were trying to be more like dandies in a way that actually could manufacture or desire what their self-image is going to be and what they're going to look like. If thinking about like Grease, like John Travolta, and all these examples from American cinema. just to compare the Zionist image and the commercial capitalist image. Another source of influence, inspiration or influence, the Rocky Horror Picture Show. So we can see that artists are not only inspired by art, visual arts or paintings and all that stuff. They can be inspired by literature, by cinema, by everything actually. And we can see that this cult movie that was cult also in Israel for many, many years from 1975 already brought to the stage this idea of gender fluidity and what masculinity is and what it can be. And of course, there's also this desire of young artists to make some provocation, to gain some interest, attention, and kind of look at me, kind of the new artist is here and to shake things up. So there is also this approach. Urs Lotti, a Swiss artist back then, dealt very much with self-portraiture and gender fluidity in the 70s. And in the 70s, it was kind of in the zeitgeist, in the spirit of the time. Also in Israel, very much inspired Yaakov Mishori and the other artists that I'm going to show. Blood under makeup. So there's also kind of general, again, this family crisis or personal crisis that he experienced. But it's also about what I said. It's about the gap. It's about the gap between what is going on underneath the surface and what people perceive on the outside. And for him, blood under makeup, makeup, there is this layer that covers, that unifies the skin, and things can be very expressive and very emotional and very dirty underneath. So if you scratch the surface, like here on the painting on the right, red lips, you can see this scratch, and it's not a scratch from the Yom Kippur War or another war. It's an emotional, it can be lipstick, but it is also kind of a symbolic bruise, right? Because the makeup couldn't cover all of these emotional bruises that are coming up physically and of course, metaphorically. Some more examples of self-portraits. Another artist who was best friends with Yaakov Mishori back then, Yehuda Purbuchai. Also, these are, on one hand, we see some photographic self-portraits that are incorporating mixed media from magazines. We also need to bear in mind that, gossip magazines and all sorts of more commercial magazines are coming into Israel. All of these visuals are very much enriching the work of some of the artists, more poppy artists like this one. It might be the place maybe to comment that, today when we think about gender fluidity, we maybe think about queerness or gayness, but these two artists identify as heterosexuals. So this is not, questioning masculinity is not necessarily a practice that was dealt by gay artists back then. I can think of very, 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 very few artists and people in general that were openly gay back then. So, it's not, or at least, in these cases, it's not dealt by queer or gay artists. Nir Hod, who is an internationally successful artist based in New York for many years, also kind of took this aesthetic of gender fluidity and questioning of masculinity and into also his own self-portrait in this very famous triptych of soldiers, female soldiers, two female soldiers on the right and on the left, and a male soldier cross-dressing in a way as a female soldier, which is again the self-portrait. Also notice that it's within, they're wearing uniforms, right? So it's not just questioning gender, it's also questioning the IDF or this body of the military in which people are supposed to be unified and self-identity is not important, because just like in the kibbutz, the IDF is a large body where your own personal feelings or emotions or identity are not important. It's not necessary. We are all supposed to fight together for a greater cause. So how come he kind of brings a very questioning identity into this space? An artist who is gay, openly gay, Adi Ness, absolutely created a revolution in the Israeli art scene already in the mid-90s by actually taking soldiers and the army as a place where this non-questionable masculinity, until back then, is being questioned. And if, just like in Yohanan Simon's painting of the man in the shower, it is not erotic at all, right? These are only kibbutz members, and we're all one big happy family, and it's not about an individual and another individual being naked together. It's kind of a camaraderie. Adi Ness is questioning this camaraderie, and what if there is someone, again, who is an other within the IDF? He has his own feelings towards maybe another soldier. How are you allowed to express it if you are allowed to express it? So he created the body of work, which is very, very, very impactful, not just in the Israeli art world, but on the Israeli art society and culture in general, because from the beginning, his work was being printed and shown, not just in museums, but in magazines, in TVs. So his influence really broke from the beginning. It actually broke the cycle or this tiny art world in Israel and inspired other people in the media and from the media to the rest of the society. I also want to mention Moshe Gershuni, that in 1980, he was a conceptual artist turned kind of expressive painter that also dealt with coming out of the closet. He was married with kids, coming out of the closet, after, falling in love with a young soldier, and also this kind of battle and combat between expressing your own feelings and within this cycle of masculine, machoistic Israeli society, Here are some images. So this playful, or this game between these two soldiers, again, the smoke of the cigarette as kind of a showing off the masculinity, like the Marlboro Man, like the Mishori self-portrait, but it also is almost like a penetration. So, on one hand, it can be very, non-erotic, it's just a game, but since it is not a snapshot, this is very staged, it has absolutely a meaning that someone has a finger and there is this foggy circle, right, about to be penetrated and about to also kind of disappear. So on the left, we see a soldier. It seems like he's just sleeping, but if you'll take a second look, it is actually also a cross. So the connection between the potential victim, the crucified victim, which is the soldier, and not just questioning masculinity, but also questioning the role of the soldier. And, in Israel, since it's kind of all the soldiers are our kids, our brothers, our uncles, our dads, what are we sacrificing them for? Or some of them, what is the sacrifice? Why we dread so much from soldiers that go to the army? Because we know that maybe they will not come back. So all these things that started kind of emerging in Israeli society, questioning the holiness of the IDF, something that wasn't doubted before. All wars are necessary and all that. Why are they necessary? So all this comes very, it comes directly and indirectly at the same time. something that I don't know if you've seen or if you ever took a bus in Israel. When I was a soldier and even before, you know, you go on a bus in Israel and soldiers sleep on one another, you know, because soldiers are constantly tired. They only sleep 6 hours a night. So you really become a body. You become unified with your with the fellow soldiers, with the people in your unit that become, you know, your kind of best friends. So it is erotic, and it's a very, very common sight just in Israeli society. You go on the bus and you see them sleeping with each other, on each other. And although this is a staged photograph, it is completely common, and because of that, maybe it also became so iconic. So if that was Adi Ness, who is, as I said, an openly gay photography-based artist, this body of work, Orthodox Eros, is a series of portraits of photographs by a female photographer, Leah Golda Holterman, which comes and goes. She grew up in an Orthodox religious family, Jewish Orthodox, of course, and throughout her life kind of went in and out this world of Orthodoxy, but still, she says when she grew up, her kind of dream was to marry a yeshiva man, right? Someone who is a smart student, chacham b'Torah, who is smart in the Torah, and that was like the ideal, right? So if we think about, okay, this muscular soldier might be an ideal, or the chalutz in the kibbutz might be an ideal, and for her, an ideal is kind of the representation of the old Jew, the old Jew, the wicked Jew, the kind of feminine Jew, all these stereotypes that the new Jew, the Zionist Jew wanted to leave behind, right? So she actually finds the beauty and the sensuality in it. The pale body of the men, the young men that are in the yeshiva, they're not tanned, they don't work in the fields. And she takes portraits of these men, also young men. And also it's about a female, it's about a woman looking at men, and not just men looking at women, a woman looking at a man or men. And also giving them their own identity, their own singular identity, or actually not giving them, but allowing them to express their own singular individuality, right? Because like in the kibbutz, like in the IDF, the Orthodox community is a community where, you know, individuality is not being completely respected or admired, right? You're not supposed to be seeking to fulfill your own individuality. You're all supposed to be studying together for a greater cause. So that is why, you know, they wear the uniform, for example, and the modesty. You're not supposed to be, you know, to stand out. But she does want them to stand out, at least for this moment when their portrait is being taken, and in a very eroticized manner, of course, right? Because these young men also have hormones. Just because they are Orthodox doesn't mean that they don't have feelings, emotions, cravings, desires. They just need to repress it. So these photographs actually give us kind of a look into something that otherwise we couldn't see, and maybe they couldn't also, you know, project to anybody else. This is a very, very iconic body of work that received the first prize at the festival in Arles in France in 2008, and it was exhibited in various countries. These are all young Orthodox, real young Orthodox men. Another Orthodox Jewish religious female artist is Hila Karbalnikov Paz. which is famous for her technique of masking tapeism. So like Impressionism in a way, she uses tape. Just have it, you know, I didn't plan it. And she uses colorful tape and she cuts it and she creates these kind of collage paintings. And in this body of work, the separate beach, Sheraton Beach in Tel Aviv, you can see there is a separate, I don't know if you've been to Tel Aviv and if you've been to that beach, but there is a separate beach in which we can see that it is segregated, and 3 days a week, women are supposed to be there, only women, and 3 days a week, men are supposed to be there, only men. What does it mean? Since, you know, you're not supposed to, of course, you know, show your skin unless you go to a mikvah or something like that. This is a place that gives these Orthodox men and women some freedom, liberation, an opportunity to experience going to the beach. You know, these people come from all over Israel, from Jerusalem that doesn't have a beach, and all sorts of places. And this is kind of a place of freedom. We can see that in this like collage painting, we can see how close it is to secular, sensual Tel Aviv, right? Just behind this fence, there is a practically almost naked man, right? Which they're not even supposed to look at. And again, I mean, maybe just like Leah Golda Holterman in her Orthodox eros, you know, so they are liberated. They don't need to be concerned about the male gaze looking at them. So even if they are wearing and they are covered with, you know, shirts or dresses, because of the water, it sticks to their bodies, right? So it's kind of, in a way, transparent and very sensual, if we think about it. So in these collage paintings, Hila Karbalnikov allows us to see what is going on in this segregated beach, because maybe otherwise I obviously, of course, couldn't go there and see it. For example, this is a close-up just for you to see the technique of these of the masking tape that she glues. Some installation views from her exhibition. Another religious artist, American Israeli, immigrated to Israel, I think over 20 years ago, Andy Arnovitz. She's based in Jerusalem. And if we talked about how, you know, some of the artists use uniformed or unified societies like the IDF, like the Orthodox society, where you're not supposed to show individuality, but there you actually feel that you're an other. And if you're a creative other, you can, you know, take it out if you want. So Andy Arnovitz wants to show how soldiers, and this is after Adines and after questioning the IDF already, she wants to show the connection between mothers and sons, because how old are these soldiers? They're 18 years old to 21 years old, right? There are babies almost. So, you know, image-wise, they might look as heroes, might think that they are mature men, but for their mothers, they're still their babies. And I even remember when I was a soldier, and it is very, very common in Israel. You know, my mom, you know, wanted to be very engaged and wanted to talk with my commanders, and, you know, and you know, these days they actually do. Back then we didn't have cell phones, but actually now every mother has the cell phone of the commander, and, you know, if something is happening, of course, soldiers can take pictures. But again, okay, so soldiers from the outside, you might think that they are heroes and super machos, but they're actually just, you know, their mother's babies. And of course, we can talk about the Jewish mom here, or the Polish mom. Another body of work by Andy Arnovitz, which I said is a religious Jew, Questionable Motives. And, Orthodox rabbis, ultra-Orthodox rabbis had some rules or talked publicly about some rules about young girls that shouldn't wear dresses and ride bikes. For example, prohibiting bike riding after the age of 5, or forbidding swimming with little girls 3 and older. Why? Who sees them as sexual creatures when they're 3 years old or 5 years old? Why does anybody think that it's immodest, right, for girls to show their legs or I don't know what? So this is a very actually brave body of work by her, actually questioning the motives behind all these rulings by these ultra-Orthodox rabbis, thinking or in questioning why do they see these young girls as potentially sexual at all at 3 years old or 5 years old. Another religious Jewish artist, Ken Goldman, with his self-portrait. I mean, it is a self-portrait. It's not a self-portrait. He uses his own body, but the work is called Dirty Jew. Dirty Jew, of course, we know that it's a well-known anti-Semitic term, but in a kind of a way of reclaiming this term and this stereotype of the old Jew, he actually wanted to show the way in which religious Jews, and him specifically, are actually fulfilling the Zionist idea of transforming the old Jew into the new Jew. And this specifically dirty Jew is dirty because he is working in the fields. So it's, again, a way to reclaim this stereotype. I see that there is something in the chat. I don't know if it's for me. Oh, I'm sorry. And if we think about what we saw last week about this image from the Zionist Congress, the 5th Zionist Congress in Basel in 1901, we can see how he actually kind of realizes with his own body and with his own being this idea of the religious Jew that finds redemption by working the fields in the East, in the land of Palestine that is going to become the state of Israel. So we had the kind of maybe gender fluid or queer other, and we had the other who is the Orthodox Jew. And we also have the others who are the Russian immigrants, the huge wave of immigration in the early 90s to Israel. And I would say that kind of the artist who is the most successful out of all, and also maybe like the representative of this the Russian immigration experience, is Zoya Cherkassky, an internationally known and successful painter. She started as a conceptual artist, and this is her in her solo exhibition Pravda, which is truth in Russian, just like the newspaper back then, which is an exhibition that was a blockbuster exhibition. People were standing in line just to see it for a very long time. And these paintings kind of look back at her immigration experience and other people, other Russian immigrants to Israel, with the humor mixed with kind of very on-point criticism. This is kind of maybe like an emblem, like a symbol of the Russian family, where the grandfather is already like, just let me be. I'm going to continue reading my Russian newspaper, and I'm not going to try and assimilate in this new country, where these two generations, the child and his parents, are actually trying to learn Hebrew and will try to assimilate. This is a painting called Itzik, which absolutely caused a scandal. It's a painting from 2012, but it caused a scandal just a few years ago, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, when someone posted it on Facebook, and it kind of became viral, in which Falafel Itzik, Itzik, who we see is a Mizrahi Israeli, right? Depicted in a very stereotypical way, is sexually harassing the Russian waitress. We can see that there is the Baba Sali in the background, meaning he has this kind of symbol showing that he is a believer, or like a practicing Jew in a way, or maybe just as a cover, and the Star of David. And she was accused of stereotypically accusing all Mizrahis as sexual predators and so on. But on the other hand, she also wanted to comment on the stereotype against the Russian women that were perceived for many, many years as prostitutes, frankly, in the Israeli society, of course, wrongly. But this is the power of stereotypes. When you deal with them in art, you put them, and then you say, okay, you think that this is a stereotype, but also what you thought about her is a stereotype. This is another iconic painting by her, New Victims. So I think her grandmother, when she would hear the airplanes landing at the Lod airport, she would say, here the new victims are coming. Who are the new victims? The new immigrants, those that bought the idea that the state of Israel wants more Jews, and it's the land of the Jews, and everybody's going to be accepted. And of course, the Russian immigrants, some of them, if not most of them, weren't even perceived by Israeli society as real Jews. So their Judaism was doubted. They came from a very different culture. And also their expectations from the state of Israel, kind of shattered and smashed, to the ground, or, with reality, right? Because maybe it was more Eastern than they expected, or more Mizrahi than they expected. Again, here are some juxtapositions, some panels, some diptychs, in which Zoya compares the anti-Semitism or the violence that Russian Jews experienced in the former USSR and in the peripheral cities, or in the Israeli society where they are now supposed to, assimilate into. So, it looks kind of different and very, very much the same. Another diptych that shows, again, violence here and there. I'm going to skip some of the images. So if I said, that their Judaism was being doubted, here's the rabbi that is coming to see if they keep a kosher home. And there's kind of a pig's snot looking at him from, and here's the Passover in Bat Yam, right? You're not supposed to be eating chametz during Passover, but the Russian delicatessen, they're like their entire world within themselves, very much, it's like, it's a world that if you don't know that it's there, you have nothing to look for. You're never going to step into it, a Russian delicatessen. So they have, for example, pork, and they have bread in Passover. Okay, I'm really jumping ahead. So with Russian immigration, I only wanted to show Zoya with very specific examples. Another wave of immigration that is another other in the Israeli art and Israeli society is, of course, the Ethiopian community. Ethiopian community, just like the Russian community, was also doubted. Their Judaism was doubted. Many of them came from a community called Beta Israel, which is it was a secluded Jewish community in Ethiopia, secluded from meaning other Jewish communities around the world, and they are perceived to be keeping customs and behaviors that go long back to like biblical times, because they were secluded and not influenced by other Jewish communities. On the other hand, their Judaism was doubted. In general, the Ethiopians weren't perceived as Jews. Not only halacha, not just because of halacha, but also by the way that they look, racism against the color of their skin, behavior. Israel developed and saw itself more and more as modern, and again wanted to be more like New York, wanted to be more really, very cutting edge as we progressed. And the Ethiopian immigration was perceived as not highly intellectual, not highly academic, not very much advanced, and in a way like a burden. There were two waves of immigration in 84 and in 91. We can see here a protest in 1985, a protest of some of the Ethiopian community, protesting and writing, addressing the head Rabbanut and say that we are Jews, we are real Jews, respect our Kohanim and don't doubt our Judaism. But their Judaism was doubted indeed, and we can see it, for example, in this painting that is in the collection of the Israel Museum in Jerusalem by Nirit Takele, who is a young Israeli artist of an Ethiopian origin. And she very much, I would say, her career has been kind of fresh in a way, young career. I think she graduated maybe 7 years ago from Shankar School of Art in Ramat Gan. And she became a star in the Israeli art scene, and also she's represented by a gallery in London. But this painting called Mikveh, why a mikveh? Because we can see here in a similar way to what we saw in Hila Karbelnikov's collage painting from the Separate Beach. We can see that they were forced to go to the mikveh and deep in the mikveh to go through this kind of a conversion to Judaism process, although they themselves see themselves as real Jews, as those that kept the Jewish laws throughout centuries in their community, and still they are being doubted. So these women were dressed in white dresses that again got wet and stuck to their skin and to their body, and they were trying to cover themselves. Why? Because this process is being overlooked by male rabbis, not by women in the mikveh, because women are not allowed to do it. So the situation is of men, rabbis in full clothing, looking at these women who see themselves as Jewish and of course want to keep their modesty according to all the Jewish rules. And their modesty is not being kept because they're being observed by these rabbis. So this is a trauma that actually happened. Nirit Takele didn't experience it herself. She wasn't, I think she was maybe a baby back then. But she heard it from someone that immigrated, that arrived to Israel in this aliyah of the 80s. And she told her the story. I think that it's very interesting with the Ethiopian community and their representation in the Israeli media in general, there has been a lack of representation for many, many, many years. In literature, in media in general, there were occasional here and there some appearances. I can think about Idan Reichel that kind of embraced some singers from the Ethiopian community. But so, and it had some elements, I'm sure that you're familiar with Idan Reichel, but it was mediated by a real Israeli, right? Or Shlomo Gronich and Makelat Shva, that, you know, it was a choir, it was a group of Ethiopian Israeli kids that he kind of embraced and held concerts with. It was hugely successful, but again, it was mediated by someone that we don't doubt. We don't doubt him. We don't doubt Gronich. We don't doubt Idan Reichel. And that is how the Ethiopian culture kind of was seen in Israeli culture. But other than that, we experienced a lack of representation. And they've been, still to this day, I would say, a huge other in the Israeli community. And Nirit Takele, this is why the gap of the years. I mean, if it's based on a case that happened in the 80s, the painting is only from 2016. Because until someone like Nirit Takele came, she's the one that actually expresses a lot of years that were not expressed otherwise, not in cinema and not anywhere else. Again, a gap between a representation in 91, this kind of mivtza, this operation of rescuing the Ethiopian Jews, bringing them to Israel, very white, very peaceful, very optimistic, very hopeful. And this one is the cover from 2015 of protests led by some people of the Ethiopian Israeli community. The rage, right? The rage is kind of has been bubbling underneath the surface, and it comes out. Nirit Takele painted also this piece, Our Donation Blood. Again, this is 2016, if I'm not mistaken. But she's referring to a huge scandal that happened in 1996, and that is when the blood donations of Ethiopian immigrants that immigrated to Israel, they were thrown away, and that was uncovered by a journalist, Ronel Fisher, and it was a huge scandal because it was kind of like a stamp on their feeling of their feeling as they are not being accepted by the Israeli society, as if their blood is not like everybody other else's blood, they're not Jewish as everybody else, and that was a huge kind of proof to show all the stereotypes, all the stigmas physically against these Ethiopians, and just literally by throwing their blood to the trash. So that was 96, and 20 years after comes Nirit Takele and kind of goes back to this misfortunate occasion. Another event that happened is the death of Yosef Salamse, an Israeli of an Ethiopian origin, that was found dead by a cliff in Israel, but his family and the Ethiopian Israeli community say that actually this death happened by Israeli soldiers that had attacked him with a Tizer gun and threw his body kind of to avoid any connection with his death. So Nirit Takele referred to the death of Yosef Salamse in two paintings. One of them is this one, the beating of the Israeli soldier. And the other one, Justice for Yosef Salamse. So as I said in last week, when I continued comparing between the Mizrahi or the dark-skinned people in Israeli society to experiences of Afro-Americans and just people of color in the United States, there are many, many similarities. And police violence against people of color in the United States very much happens or is claimed to be happening in Israel as well, but you're not going to read about it in the newsletter that you receive in your email about news from Israel. But this also happens. All these things happen, and some of them years after, or sometimes, like in this case, months after these misfortunate events, they come out in art. But the Ethiopian community or the Ethiopian representation in art or in the art by Nirit Tekele is not just tragic. It also shows the beauty in this community. For example, this one in the painting After Friday Prayer. And also there are empowering images like this self-portrait. So this is a self-portrait of a woman soldier of color, right? An Ethiopian Israeli or an Israeli of an Ethiopian origin, which is a self-portrait. So again, the Ethiopians that are considered to be like very gentle and very modest and very quiet, just like the Yemenites, back then, which also connects us to the lecture of last week, also shows kind of fierceness and strength, and also the sense of being just like everybody else in the IDF. And in this painting, a self-portrait in the studio, she's also reversing the gaze as a fully clothed woman painter, that actually she's the one in charge and she's the one that is directing her gaze to these Adam and Eve, the naked or the nude male and female that are in her studio. It's 8 o'clock and I'm asking Rabbi Feinstein what to do because I still have some work to show, but I'm not sure.
Keep going.
Yes.
Going.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. We're here to listen. So good. You're doing fine.
Okay. Cool. So Nirit Tekele is one example. There are a few other Israelis of Ethiopian origin that are successful. Actually, I would say that she very much broke the glass ceiling for Israeli artists, and after she gained success, other Israeli, especially Israeli women artists of Ethiopian origin, also gained some success and fame and prizes and solo museum exhibitions. And also something that happened is this collective of artists, Israeli artists of an Ethiopian origin, Beta, as I said, Beta Israel, continuing this Beta Israel community that came from Ethiopia. It's an artistic collective that published their own magazine. So it's a group of visual artists, photographers, painters, poets, writers, authors, journalists, and so on, actors. This is a piece by Benny Wudu, a self-portrait, which kind of connects to this idea of the Sabra, right? This kind of iconic / cliche idea or visuals of who is the real Israeli. The real Israeli is the Sabra, who is kind of edgy on the outside, but is actually very soft and gentle on the inside. So in order to be kind of accepted to the Israeli society, you need to become a Sabra. So this is a self-portrait of a Sabra, but also someone who is hiding behind a Sabra. The Sabra, so we tend to think maybe that it's a very iconic symbol, or a symbol to Israeliness. Of course, it is also very much, we can see it in American paintings or Mexican, but it is actually also has been reclaimed by Palestinian, Israeli, Arab artists, saying in a way, the Sabra or the cactus, it's not an Israeli symbol really, because the cactus or the Sabra was here on this land way before the Jews arrived. So it's reclaiming of this image, and it started with kind of, I would say, the father of not of the Palestinian art, but Palestinian Arab Israeli art that actually happened in Israel. I'm not talking about the Palestinian Authority and all that stuff. Asim Abu Shakra, unfortunately, passed away at the young age of 29, but he was a star, an art star in his life, and became hugely, his work, not him, he died, but his work became hugely iconic in Israeli art and in Palestinian art. And this, why is it iconic? Because it takes the Sabra, that is disconnected from the ground, just like the Palestinians or the Israeli Arabs that feel as they were taken from their place, from their territory, and they had to find a new place for themselves. But in this new place, they cannot grow roots because the roots stayed somewhere else and they don't feel as if they belong in this new place. So this is an example of what Abu Shakra painted. This is a very common depiction in his work of this cactus that is kind of in a pot. It is displaced. It is on a shelf. Specifically here, it's in Tel Aviv. You can see the high rise. So he's it's by the window as if it is looking outside, thinking, what do I have to do with this urban skyscrapers or urban landscape? I'm coming from a completely different place, and I'm displaced and misplaced. So this is Abu Shakra. Abu Shakra's family. Abu Shakra is a very famous family in the Israeli art world. His uncles and brother and cousin, it's a group of artists. It's a family of artists. One of them founded the art gallery in Umm-el-Fachem. Another one now has a solo exhibition at the Petah Tikva Museum. So it's a very artistic and well-known family in Israel. Durar Bakri, a young Israeli Arab. Some of these artists would identify themselves as Palestinians. I don't identify them as Palestinians. I call them Israeli Arabs because they do not live in the Palestinian Authority. They live in the state of Israel. So that is why, it's always problematic. How do other people kind of identify other people? How do I identify him? He might say that he's Palestinian, but he lives in Tel Aviv. So again, he's going back to this icon, Abu Shakra of the misplaced cactus, and puts it on the roof on this building in Tel Aviv. And if Abu Shakra's cactus kind of feels very sad, in Bakri's painting, the cactus actually continues growing, and he might be relocated to another place. is kind of almost reaching the sky, right? It's connecting with the sky. It's open. It's in an open place, not like Abu Shakra's cactus. Some of the change in Israeli art, in the Israeli art world, actually happened by the other female artists. So if they are religious, and if they are Ethiopian, and if they are Russian, very much of the change that happened and very much of the representation that happened was led by women artists. And the same is in the representation of the Israeli Arabs or the Palestinian Israeli Arabs. This is Anissa Ashkar that also received recognition from, I would say, in a very early stage of her career. She actually practiced calligraphy on her face. So as an artistic act, but not only in performances or galleries or art spaces, but she actually already when she was an art student, she would go out to the street every day after writing something in Arabic on her face. Why? Yes, her interest in calligraphy, but also to be seen, or not, or to stop being unseen, and and her Arabic or Muslim identity not to be erased, but to be present in the Israeli society. So not just people that want to see her, that come to a museum or that come to a gallery, but as kind of showing her identity, or in a way almost showing off her identity, right? Every single day for over 2 decades. This is Champion, a tribute to Muhammad Ali. Another work, my mother said, the fertile woman's womb is like an orchard. Again, the pressure in the Arabic society to stay home, to be a mother, and not to have a career, not to be an artist, and not so on. Another Israeli Arab woman artist, Hanan Abu Hussein, very much deals in her work with violence in the Arab community, violence against women, again, because they are forced to stay home. Not all of them. The violence that is happening towards them is very much silenced. The cases of murder or death of women in the Arab community is not always being investigated by the police, because the police is not just happy to go into these villages and deal with these suspects. So these cement casts of knives, like a kitchen knife, is suspended from the ceiling above us, like this constant cloud of a threat that is hanging above her and above many, many other women, and just in general. Another artist, woman artist, Raida Adon, who is also an actress. This is a still shot from her video, A Woman Without a Home. This is not a photo collage or a photo montage. This is a real bed in the sea. Again, talking about displacement, about where is the home. Keep wandering. If the wandering Jew kept wandering from one place to the other because he was attacked, because he couldn't find a place where he could, grow roots and reconnect. It's the same with many of these Israeli Arab and Palestinian artists. We're approaching the end. This is another young Israeli Arab star artist, Nardin Saruji. This is from an exhibition that she had at Bet HaGeffen, the Geffen House in Haifa. It's a center, it's a cultural center for Jewish Arab, for Jews and Arabs in Haifa. What is she doing? She's kind of digging into the architecture of the space of the white cube in order to show the history that is being covered and kind of erased. So she's peeling the linoleum floor, for example, to show the tiles that were behind it, the history that is kind of being forgotten. The bricks. This is, of course, a conceptual piece because all these papers were not in the wall. But it's in order to show like previous histories, traces of histories that had been kind of in a way whitewashed or erased. And this piece actually reminded me of something that some of you may have seen at the Hammer Museum a few years ago. American artist, LA-based artist Mark Bradford made this mural. He carved into this wall. The wall was for over, I don't know, a decade more. The Hammer Museum invited artists to create site-specific murals. And each time the next artist, in order for the next artist to make a piece, they would paint white the previous piece. So Mark Bradford actually carved into this wall, layering like an archaeologist, layering or discovering the layers of forgotten artworks and history that are kind of trapped underneath the white surface. This is the bundle. Just like the wandering Jew, if you need to escape, what do you take from a burning house? What do you wrap and take with you? This is textile and paint, but one of them, the second one, is a plaster casting. Also reminded me of just, you know, the experience of an immigrant, but also in Israeli art history, Meir Pichadze, a self-portrait with the suitcases. I'm always emotionally feeling like an immigrant as someone who is displaced. And I'm going to finish with Samach Shehadi, who is also an Israeli Arab / Palestinian artist that is dealing with Palestinian history. And its, you know, and its connection to the territory of the state of Israel. For example, this one, Our Home, we can see an elderly couple sitting at a place that perhaps was their home, kind of in the, it could have been just a very beautiful landscape drawing in graphite, but it is actually soaked in emotions and, you know, and a sense of loss. And this is an installation view from her exhibition, solo exhibition that she had at the Tel Aviv Museum in 2019. So again, we can see that this is the final image. I want to say that in Israel and the Israeli art world, all these others, and this is a very, very brief and very kind of carefully selected group of artists, but there are many, 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 many more. I would say that with the internet and with the exposure of the state of Israel to what is happening in the world, and also the more people understood that what is being told to them is not completely true and maybe even a complete lie. I think more and more people also, they want to do stuff to change their life, to change their surroundings, to change their community, to change the culture, and not to obey kind of blindly and trust blindly people that are supposed to lead the way. And that is connecting with the idea of Zionism, because Zionism was an idea that people, you know, followed, right? They followed, it's an utopian idea, they followed it naively in a way with a sense of promise. They actually believed in it. And I'm not saying it wasn't good for the time or it's not a good idea, but it doesn't fit everybody and not everybody can fit in. And what do you do when someone doesn't fit? Do you dismiss him? Do you try to erase his identity? And I think that in Israel, all these identities that didn't melt in this melting pot, that couldn't or didn't want to or just couldn't fit into it, they started to surface. And I think that we can see it very beautifully in the Israeli art world. That's it. That's me for tonight. I think, unless there is a question or questions.
Yes, Sagi, thank you. Can we take off the screen sharing so we can see you? Yeah. And thank you for this remarkable survey of contemporary Israeli art. It's quite remarkable. I have a sort of very naive question to ask, and I'm going to apologize in advance for the naivete of the question, but it strikes me that, you know, you've shown us so many of these images, and the artists in these images seem to have this agenda, as you said at the very end, to tell the truth, to shatter stereotypes, to shatter myths, particularly myths that we here in America happen to keep. American Jews think of the Russian immigration to Israel as a great liberation of people. And then to see Zoya's pictures of such disillusionment and pain, we think of the Ethiopian immigration as a great, again, redemption, as a Operation Moses to redeem them from slavery. And yet the images that you show were so difficult and so painful. How do I ask the question? Is there any hope? I mean, are there images of hope? Is there anyone in Israel in the artistic scene that also celebrates the possibilities of a new state and the possibilities that Zionism raised, and not simply its failures and its disillusionment? I know it's a naive question, but it's difficult to see all these images one after the other and not see anything that balances it with some sense of hope.
I'll give you, for me, this is very hopeful. I think that for me, the hope is by seeing all these people, all these artists that are individual artists, but they actually represent voices of people who are not artists, right? But they are of their community. And this is the hope of people that were silenced, and the voices and the people that were overlooked. So, it's very hopeful. I think that it shows that Israel is not just an idea. As I said, it's not just a baby that we're going to mold and, make it what we want it to be. It's not. You can't. It's a state. It's a state of over 8 million people, right? And every person is different from the other. So no one can expect a cohesive, monolithic society that is just going to fulfill Zionistic ideas. You can't. There is a reality, and in reality, you have people to deal with, even within your own family. So for me, it's very hopeful. For me, the fact that museums and Israeli society gets to see all these perspectives of people that experienced, and their parents experienced, horrific things. Horrific. But who remembers it? Who do you expect to bring up the horrific scandal of throwing away the blood donations of Ethiopians in the mid-90s? Who remembers it? No politician is going to remind you of it. No one, unless he's Israeli or Ethiopian. No one is going to remind you the racism and the stereotypes against the Russian Jews. No one is going to remind you of that, unless it's someone that wants to, unless this is someone that experienced it, unless this is someone whose parents experienced it, right? Otherwise, there are many, many other things to promote, so no one is going to remind you. So the artists are reminding you. And I think that with these reminders, Israelis, I don't want to talk about the society, I can talk about individuals. I think that individuals that get exposed to artworks, to nuanced artworks and experiences by other people, might become more nuanced in their own identity, be more empathetic towards other people, more educated, more sensitive. And for me, this is very, very hopeful and very optimistic. So Yeah.
Now, let me pursue this for just a moment again, and I want to pursue it from my naivete, and I mean that very honestly. So here in America, we American Jews and those who love Israel here feel called upon constantly to defend Israel. Right?
I would love to ask you about it.
Well, but I just want to ask you about this because just this last week, for example, Amnesty International comes out with a report with some remarkable, vicious accusations about Israel, and we jump to its defense. And there is such a sensitivity, a very, very powerful sensitivity to anything negative that is said in public about Israel. It's if you know.
Why?
Well, that's what I wanted to get to.
But this is a question that I need to ask you.
I
Not
know,
you ask
I know.
me, I'm asking you.
Well, but what I want to point out, first let me ask my question, and then you can ask me. But the first thing is so interesting is that within Israeli culture, there is much more room and much more security to open itself up to criticism than there is here. There's much more criticism to open up than there is here, which is remarkable.
Absolutely, because we know the truth, and you know an image, not you specifically.
Yeah,
but American Jews know or are familiar with an image of the state of Israel. I don't know how old this image is. I don't know how long it goes for you specifically, or for the members of Valley Bet Shalom. But if you haven't lived in Israel, and you can live in Israel and love Israel. I love going to Israel. My entire family is there. There are many things that are great in Israel, many. But it's like falling in love with someone after you know him versus falling in love with someone on the first date, or falling in love with someone's picture on an app on the phone. When you know someone and you fall in love with them and you love them deeply, it's only after you know them. It's only after you struggle with them. It's only after the veneer falls and the truth is being exposed, I think.
It's also because there's a deep sense of security that the state has a certain permanence, the culture has a certain permanence. And here in diaspora, in the Galut, what I mean that, and I mean that seriously as Galut, there's a sense of Israel's vulnerability and its tentativeness. And so we feel much more sensitive to potential attacks from outside. And we see those potential attacks as important, as powerful, as worthy of responding. So some of this art is shocking to the eyes of American Jews, because unless you had told us that it came from Israeli artists, we would say, well, some anti-Semite wrote that, painted that. I mean, look, again, some of those pictures are like viciously self-critical, but they're self-critical. And that's what's so very interesting, don't you think?
I don't know if viciously, but
no, vicious. I don't mean viciously I don't mean viciously in any. I mean it's powerfully self-critical. That's what I meant.
Yeah, Israel is, it's not Switzerland. Israel is a place that every day there is something. There is a disaster.
Yeah.
Every day, Israelis in Israel cannot live peacefully, cannot. If there is something peaceful, if there is a day peaceful that is peaceful, what happened? How can it be? Something is coming. There is like a tragedy on our way. This is because Israelis, and I know I lived there for most of my life.
Yes.
There is something, if it's too perfect, something is going to happen. And if you'll join my course at the university, you'll see how many artists, Israeli artists, deal with ruins, with disasters, a lot. By the way, I want to mention, I see that Barb and Len have a question. I want to say something. I just want to say, since you mentioned the Jews of the diaspora or the Galut, I very respectfully don't like this word, Galut. I don't think that Israel is the center of the world, not even the Jewish world, and whoever doesn't live in Israel, he has a problem with his Judaism or with his identity, or needs to go to Israel, or is less worthy because he lives outside of Israel. Absolutely not. And I don't accept this. I don't accept this word or term, galut or diaspora. I think that we need to stop using it.
I appreciate
only
that.
In historical perspective.
I appreciate that, but you and I can debate this at another time.
We'll debate it. Let Barda say.
I think galut is actually a frame of mind. And I think that a lot of us, even people in Israel, have a galut frame of mind. It doesn't matter. It's not a geography. It's a statement about your psychology and how you think of yourself as a Jew in the world. But that's for another time. Barb, did you want to ask a question? You have to unmute and we can hear your question if that's okay.
I think this is wonderful. I mean, what country that's been around for less than 80 years has so many people with so many opinions and wanting to see so much change happen? I'm very hopeful about this. What other country can you identify that has so many people kvetching legitimately about things they don't like? I mean, good grief, this baby is hardly weaned.
And so fetching so articulately, that's what's so
I feel very good about it. And I'm very happy to see it. And we've got to uncover our warts in order to be able to have them removed. And I think it's very positive. But I also wanted to mention something too, which is a little different. When we were in Israel, we were in Savat and we were going up the walk up to all the wonderful art places. And we turned around and there was a museum there, a gallery that had art by Dorit Gur. Do you know who Dorit Gur is?
Dorit Gur?
Dorit Gur. Okay, Dorit Gur. It's a woman, and she does nothing but art related to Kabbalah. And she works and lives in Savat. And it's wonderful because her art is fantastic. And we bought a piece. It's probably our, if the house was burning, it'd be the art and then Len.
Take Len first. Take Len first. You can get another piece of art, but you can't get another
example. Here's a woman who's doing nothing but Kabbalah. Can you imagine? I mean, the rabbis are tearing the hair out of their chin. I think it's a very, very good thing. So I feel very hopeful about all of this. And yeah, it's not fun to look at a lot of this stuff. There are a lot of people who are not happy, but my God, but there are a lot of people that are. And where were they before they came to Israel? I think that's another question. But thank you very much for this. I think it's wonderful food for thought. And I would love to see us have a discussion in our congregation about these things, because it's important. You have to understand Israel to love Israel. If we idealize Israel, we're just going to keep finding things to criticize. We're going to be angry and mad at all these things that Israel's not doing. But it's a baby country, and I'm basically feeling pretty good about it. So thank you so much for all of that. It was really, really a terrific presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Sagi, before we finish, so to those of us who want to pursue this, can you give us a couple of ways that we can learn more? So you have a course at the university?
Wow. Yeah, I do teach Israeli art history and contemporary Israeli art at the American Jewish University in Bel Air. It's on Zoom. I've been teaching there for a couple of years. And I don't know. I mean, I wish Israeli art would have more presence. I mean,
is there a book? Is there a good book or a?
I started writing a book a few years ago, and then after 2 years, the publisher couldn't find the money to publish it. So I have the book, but it's not published.
Someday.
There aren't a lot of books, or any really, which are not academic. So there is research in English about Israeli art, which is very specific, dealing with work of specific people. There are plenty of catalogs of singular artists or group exhibitions, but these are all catalogs. So if anybody is interested, I have at home hundreds of books about Israeli art.
Well, we'll continue this then. Thank you so very much for your expertise. It was wonderful. And thank you to everyone for listening. Thank you to the Baum family for endowing our lecture tonight. And thank you to everyone who joined us. Thank you to Jackie for helping us with the technical part. Please be reminded that next week at 7 o'clock, we continue here on Zoom, Facebook, and YouTube, wherever you can find us online. And our guest will be Donny Massing talking about Israeli music. So bring your ears next week. Okay. Thank you to Sagi
Thank
for
you
a
very
wonderful
much.
set of lectures. And thank you to